There are dozens of genes being discussed right now. MTHFR, COMT, these are just the tip of the iceberg. But the real question isn't what genes do you have? It's how are those genes expressing in the context of your life? And just because you have a variant, it doesn't mean that it's expressing in a way that is impacting your health. Dr. Verzal and I are here with another episode to discuss genes. Dr. Verzal has been working for many years to try to share the truths that he's discovered in his clinical practice with everyone. We take a lot of time to look at research and then take that research and actually see if it applies to our real clinical experiences. And in these Truth or Trend podcasts, our goal is to create a greater conversation. Our goal is to ask new questions. Our goal is to look at things from a different perspective and not accept the limitations that have been put on everybody by somebody else's, the limits of their creativity and their beliefs and their everything. So welcome everybody to another episode. Dr. V, we're excited to bring up some research that you and I have talked about for a very long time. And I think everybody needs to start thinking about this a little bit. So let's talk about this, because we did have somebody actually ask about this in a comment. And I want to remind everybody, if there is a topic, if you put it in the comments, we're very likely going to discuss it. So thank you for the comments. Thank you for the feedback. We get some people pushing back on us, and that's great. And we had somebody claiming that we didn't dive deep enough, and so we only have so much time. And if you disagree with what we're saying, we love that. Please disagree with us. Right.
So what they meant by we didn't dive deep enough is we didn't support what they thought was right.
That's right. But they couldn't provide the research to back their claim. That was the whole point. Yeah. They wanted us to. Which didn't exist. That's the problem.
Right.
They just accepted that somebody else told them that. And that's what we're trying to break down, is so many times people have accepted from an authority. They've assumed that this person has done their research because they're a medical doctor or a PhD or whatever it is. And we're challenging some of that to say, well, let's actually look at that research and see what it really means. And again, the next most important step is, how does that apply to real life? Right. That's what we're doing for everybody.
Right.
You were telling a cool story about this genetic mutation situation before.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Right. And a lot of what kind of shaped my paradigm on this was an MD, actually, Dr. Klinghardt. Many of you are familiar with him and his work, and somewhat controversial at times, which is great.
Right.
This is pre-COVID, looking into the gene thing, and as the whole folic acid, folate, methylation, was blowing, and I'm looking into, well, what does this mean? How could people with this MTHFR gene problem not have problems when they eat vegetables, for example? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right? And kind of going, wait a minute, what does this really mean? And so I was looking at Klinghardt's work. He was talking about, he does a lot of gene testing. He tested this young man, turned out to have a homozygous MTHFR gene defect. So those of you that are into this recognize homozygous means that meant in literature terms that both his parents had this MTHFR gene defect. And, the kid is duped at that point. It's kind of what, current technology the gene people would say. And so he was treating this child, then had the opportunity to test both mom and dad. He said, we need to check you guys. You have this same problem. And lo and behold, neither parent had the MTHFR gene defect.
Wow.
Wait a minute. How does that work? That doesn't fit the paradigm. What's going on here? And so he ultimately determined that it was a retrovirus. It is retroviruses that downregulate, that compromise the gene defect. So, there's so much that can go on from all of this.
And let's share some of this research that we're going to put below, because we want people to think we're just making up crazy stories, right? We've actually had some decent research behind this. And this is from the National Library of Medicine, talking about retroviruses as agents of genetic change. And again, we'll put these links below, but this is kind of the beginning of the conversation that we're talking about here.
Yeah. So if a virus causes it, why can't we kill the virus, so to speak, and uncause it? Right.
Let's stop and say that again. So this is where I think people don't think in terms of this. They've been told you have a genetic variation and that's it. You've got a life sentence and that's all that's happening. But the question I always ask people is, if it can change in that direction, why can't it change in the other direction? Why does it
100%.
in that question, right?
Yes, that is preach it from the rooftops. I've kind of dug into this, and I've spent time on AI and research trying to find confirmation that, hey, we downregulate, we kill off this retrovirus, and then the gene test is different, is better. I have a buddy that has a gene company, and I'd love to do some research that way. But so yeah, that's the unanswered question at this point.
Right.
Ultimately, what this means, if you know that you have a gene defect. I mean, that's the empowerment part of what Truth or Trend is all about, is we're trying to empower people, right? And so if, God forbid, you know that you have this, really what that means is you need to be more adamant, and double down on taking care of yourself ultimately, right? Because it's
Absolutely.
toxic metals that compromise it. It's that when we're going to get into the the viral load and the stealth pathogen sort of aspect to it. But hey, first step is don't take a crappy, sorry, Trader Joe's type of a vitamin. It has folic acid in it, because you're not going to metabolize it well. You need
Right.
the whole food types of folate that are active, that'll facilitate that pathway. I mean, that was the big, back early on when this was becoming kind of the thing, was, oh, people with MTHFR can't take folic acid. Well, yeah, they can't. No, nobody really should be taking folic acid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But so ultimately, and that was another, back in the day, I'm like trying to research this. Well, if they can't take folic acid, what's up with vegetables and stuff? Came up with, that food, in vegetables, it doesn't stress the MTHFR pathway,
Right.
but folic acid does. That was kind of revelational 15 years ago when this was starting to get hot. And again, this is before COVID, before the the pandemic of retroviruses that everybody got exposed to and really compromised.
Mhm, mhm. And so, what are we
So,
saying? We're saying all the people out there who have been overly concerned and told that you have MTHFR or you have COMT and that there's nothing you can do about it. We're saying there's a lot that you can do about it that you haven't been told about. That's where we're starting with, right? And we're not going to
right.
get to, we're going to dive as deep as we can on all the things you can in the
It's
time
a
we
big,
have today.
yep.
But and I know that sometimes there's an emotional pushback on this because people have invested a lot of intelligence into this, right?
Mhm,
And when
mhm.
you have almost created an identity around having this genetic variation, you may be resistant to accepting the fact that it's possible that you can overcome this.
Very well
So
stated.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, there's empowering, and I mean, that's one of my biggest frustrations in practice is people, oh, your child has diabetes. This is the way you have to live, and no,
Right,
it's not.
right,
There is hope, and they you've been given this cancer, or God forbid, this gene diagnosis, and go curl up in the corner and and suck your thumb is really kind of what people are being told. And
right.
yuck, so frustrating.
Yeah.
And
Well,
trying to overpower trying to re-empower people,
right.
it's an uphill battle when they've been told that kind of garbage.
Without a doubt. And it takes repeating because it's been repeated so many times that a genetic situation is a life sentence. And so it's going to take us saying this many, many, many times. And we probably would get a lot of pushback on this. But the question I always ask is, well, how is it possible, like I just said, for it to go one way but not the other? And we're not saying that
Mhm,
viruses are the only reason, but we're saying we should
mhm,
be asking that question.
mhm,
And
mhm,
this last weekend I was speaking, and I remember this is a phrase that comes to mind a lot when I'm talking: is I prefer questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Nice.
Is we're questioning these answers that have been said. They can't be questioned, and they should
Mhm,
absolutely be questioned because
mhm,
so many times. And I was mentoring a doctor last week, and same thing. He said this rare genetic condition, right, is creating
mhm,
this whole host of things, and it's destroying this in the body. And what do I do to help this person from dying because they have this gene? And the conversation changed to, well, what are all the things that are affecting the expression of that gene, right? That's
mhm,
exactly
mhm,
what we're going to talk about.
mhm,
I want to remind, and I'm going to say these things probably many times in this episode because they
mhm,
bear repeating, is that just because you have the variant doesn't mean that you're expressing the variant,
yep,
right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
just because and what we're going to get deeper into is just
mhm.
because you have the gene doesn't mean that you always necessarily have to have that variant, which is kind of, that's a big one, right? That's one that people are going to
Right,
freak out about.
right. Right, right. And so we need to look at the things as you talked about, how do we suppress and express that gene? That's where, the double down, the inspiration from this conversation really comes from is like, okay, my grandfather, I watched my grandfather die of cancer and arthritis. It's
Mm,
like, I don't want to do that. What do I need to do? I mean, that caused me to double down.
right.
So use this kind of information, like, okay, I've got a little, aspect that's going to make me a little bit more sensitive than others. Be more diligent about, reducing your exposure to the toxic metals and things that are going to stress the MTHFR gene, right? Or
Right.
the toxins and the viruses, and keep your viral load handled. And, we're clinicians. A lot of people that we're talking to on this podcast, are familiar with stealth pathogen protocols. So, I mean, that
Sure.
all needs to come into play.
Yep.
Most of these, like, I talked about Lyme inhibiting sulfation. Now we've got
Mhm.
retroviruses inhibiting methylation. So we've got some powerful tools, clinicians. We have some powerful tools in our hands to inhibit the expression of these things and really change the outcome of a person's life and the quality of a person's life.
Absolutely. And so
Mhm.
can I share with just to get set a little foundation for everybody, but and then we'll go into the virus piece and all these other things. Just a little bit about methylation. Now, these are two slides from a section of a mental health seminar that I teach about methylation because it does have a big impact on mental health, obviously. But I want to give a
Mhm.
visual for those of you who can actually be watching right now. So one of the things that we want to remind everybody is that your DNA is wrapped around these highly basic proteins called histones. So think of it as a spool and you're wrapping thread around it. And so that's why I put this little visual up here to see that, right? These histones are the spools, and we tightly wrap the genes around them. Now, this is something that Dr. V has been talking about for a long time. This is what you taught at your Hope in an Autoimmune World, is that we have methylation and acetylation, right? These are two different pathways. And what people I want to remind people of is when we methylate, one of the things that people don't realize is that we do not express genes. We actually tightly wrap the genetic DNA around the histones to protect it so that it doesn't get damaged. But when we
Mhm.
acetylate, we unravel it so that we can have genetic expression. And like I said earlier, this is kind of like everything has ebb and flow. We breathe in and we breathe out. And it's very similar with this. We methylate and then we acetylate. We're going back and forth so that we have expression, but we're not constantly expressing or we're not constantly not expressing. Are you with me so far, Dr. V? Am I saying this all correctly?
This is I'm loving it, and I'm just thinking my mind's going to all the so much we can talk about here with the symptoms associated with hyperacetylation,
Right.
hypomethylation. The symptoms are so profound. And I also want to hopefully share, there's reflexes that we have ways to muscle test the in real time, hypo. Carry on. I don't want to slow you down there. That's a great subject there.
Yeah, not at all. Well, it's a great visual, and people need to remember that, right? Because they think of methylation as just this process that helps detoxify or creating a methyl donor. But there is an aspect
Hmm.
of that methylation that is tightly wrapping those around. And this is where I hope anybody who is listening who's been convinced that they need to take a methylated B, right,
Hmm.
by
Hmm.
very influential people out there. And every time I talk to a group of doctors, there's somebody there who has been convinced. And this is not a challenge to their intelligence. This is saying, look, you have been told this by many people who've accepted this without challenging it. But what happens when people do this for too long, they definitely throw things out of balance, right? It's like you can't just breathe
Hmm.
in and never breathe out. And you can't just always breathe out and never breathe in.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
have to have both. And when you're skipping steps and you're creating hypermethylation, you can create a very dangerous situation long term. And so
Hmm.
when we want to be able to support these things,
As
we don't
well
want
as
to do them.
hypomethylation is a very dangerous
Exactly.
situation long term. Keep going. I,
Exactly.
do want I hate to interrupt you because you're on. This is a great subject.
No, absolutely.
Keep
Well,
going. Keep going.
but what I think I want to hear from you is we're talking about things that support methylation. We're always thinking about how do we make sure methylation is fully supported? Do we have all the magnesium and the zinc and the B6 and everything that our body needs? But what about
Hmm.
acetylation, right? We
Right.
don't talk
Right.
about that. So
Hmm.
let's talk about that. How do we support acetylation? What are the things that inhibit acetylation, and what are the things
Hmm.
that facilitate it, right?
Hmm. So symptoms. I mean, a lot of a lot of what's people listening are patients, health pursuers. So we need to talk about symptoms of high acetylcholine, acetylation. The nice thing is it's mostly B5 driven. So B5 will help knock down that high acetylation. So again, symptoms is panic attack, right? That's the druggie coming off of drugs. Their liver's under stress. Acetylcholine is the brain's control of the liver. So acetylcholine goes high, and that's panic attack type of anxiety. So there's a symptom for you to look at to know, hey, this is an area I need to look at in my life and recognize that there are big upside, potentials of not correcting this pathway, as you just so eloquently laid out with some great diagrams. So we have all that to deal with. Again, the good news is taking the right source of pantothenic acid, as a food source and cellular vitality is a way to do that in the SP lineup. So that's a great way to kind of blunt that overzealous reaction. I'll show for the muscle testers out there, try to get my camera down so I can show the liver pathways here. So in general, if you put your thenar eminence, put your left hand over the liver, your long finger, your third digit is going to be at spleen 21. That's first phase of detoxification. The thenar eminence is going to be at acetylation. The first phase, I think it's liver 2 or something. I forget mine's a little bit tender. I need to work on that. They will actually be tender and reactive. And I figured out all these pathways that are on the poster behind me, and I just on the camera, let's see, try to get my camera working here. Sorry. So I guess that's good though. So there's the whole liver pathway. And so right at LI4 is basically going to be the methylation pathway. So that's mid-clavicular line. I always say, ladies, is right at the bottom of your underwire.
Okay.
So that's the methylation point. So they're going to be tender. I used the challenge substances back in the day when some of the labs were first coming out to do these. Sorry.
Extreme close-up. There you go.
So those pathways, I use challenge substances like caffeine, things that the liver stresses to stress those pathways to determine where those reflexes were. And so that gives us, and then we have, excess or deficiency that we can test over them. So we've got real-time ways to muscle test and see how these pathways are affected. We can use foods to determine, hey, you're challenged in the MTHFR gene. Sorry, trying to get my camera backing out a little bit. Yeah. Let's go down. Get away. AI camera, sorry. I'm trying to learn how to work.
Yep.
So we can use those in real time to determine how they're affecting the body so that, knowledge is power, right? So if we understand how these are going to affect us, then it's going to certainly inspire us to think twice when whatever we're going to smoke or something that's, potentially lethal long term.
Right. So let's just review that real quick. So acetylation is often is underworking. It's not working well enough because of a lack of B5. Is that what you're saying? Pantothenic acid?
Pantothenic acid helps break down acetylation, helps facilitate it. So when it's over revving, then B5 is a simple solution. Yeah.
Okay. That's usually the case. But what if we're under acetylating? What if we're hypoacetylating?
Right. Yeah. So those pathways, we can look at if one of the others they'll challenge to determine if I fix methylation, will acetylation settle down?
Right.
Histamine, we have a low histamine point. We have high histamine point, which is bilateral spleen 21. All this stuff is testable, which puts a lot of power in our hands as clinicians, as muscle testers, to really see what's relevant in a person's life right now.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's even a gene that's being tested, the DAO, the diamine oxidase, which breaks down histamine, right, especially from food. And so they're saying that we should test for that because the variation of that can contribute to histamine intolerance, headaches, flushing, symptoms. But what we're talking about is that when you get all the chemistry in there right, your body can balance it out on its own, right? Right. And you mentioned like P450, that's another one, right? That people can test for. This is CYP, I think it's 1A2. There's these are all of them. Yeah. And that has to do with caffeine metabolism, like you were just saying. And so we've talked about that one a lot, right? Because that could be fast to slow caffeine metabolizers, and it can directly impact how somebody responds to those things. But so instead of just saying that gene's always going to do that, though, we got to remember there's this whole context. There's all these other things.
Balance.
Right, that are impacted.
Balance.
Right. So
That's probably should be our take home for this one.
yeah. Well, and you mentioned a product called, well, it used to be called Cellular Vitality. Now it's called B
Mhm,
Vitality with CoQ10.
mhm,
That
mhm,
I do
mhm,
find is a good vitamin B source, right? When you are looking for B5, right? That is
mhm.
going to be one of the top ones for that. For those of you
Right.
who use standard processed products and are wondering what's a good B5 source, if you're going to
Mhm,
stop,
mhm.
but B5 should
Right.
come from foods. It should come from beef and mushrooms and meats, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
that's one
Right.
of the
Right.
ways that people would get that.
And then we
And
get the building blocks with it.
right,
So what's in there? The aminos, right?
right, right, right.
Mhm,
And so these are things that I often caution people about too, because we talk a lot about fasting, and I think fasting is really good, but it can really expose a deficiency when you go into a fast. So I'm always wanting to remind people that you really need to do a feast before going into a fast, because
mhm,
you do not have those nutrients and they're already low. And then you go into a situation where you starve your body for 2 to 3 days of even more of those nutrients. You're not going to maximize the benefit of a fast that way, right? The fasting is great medicine, but only if you
mhm.
have the micronutrients to help facilitate this function.
And if you have the adrenals to sustain it.
That's right. Yes, sir.
So,
Yes.
so clinically, I mean, just a quick rabbit hole. I mean, adaptogens, consider your rhodiolas and adrenal glandulars to get through that fast. If you're already a stress junkie, and then you're going to try to fast, use the rhodiola and ginseng, or ashwagandha during those fasted states to help the adrenals deal with the cortisol production that's going to break the body down, set up the mTOR and all that sort of stuff during the fast.
Right.
So that was a rabbit trail.
Rabbit
We've got a
trail.
lot
That's
more to
right.
talk about.
That's where
Got a
it's.
lot more to talk about on methylation CMMT.
So let's switch back to. So I think we haven't. I mean, in the past we've covered all the things that help facilitate methylation, help facilitate acetylation, those things that inhibit it. But I just wanted to bring that point back, is that these two are balancing factors, right?
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
you, it's kind of like I said, breathing out and breathing in, and you want both of those, and you want to have balance, and you want to have the ability to do both without one getting stuck, right, or the other one, or forcing one to be one way or the other. And
Hmm.
one other thing I wanted to mention, though, too, is just because you have one genetic marker that suggests that you are hypomethylating or that you have a tendency towards that, that doesn't mean you don't have other genes that could be influencing it in the opposite direction. So that's the other caution I want to put to anybody out there who have let one genetic marker dictate the path of their life, right, and how they're moving forward.
Right.
But
Not
let's
your identity.
not your identity. Yes, yes. But
Yeah,
let's go
it's
ahead.
inspiration. Use it as inspiration.
There you
Really,
go.
it's kind of
Exactly.
our issue here. Okay, you know that you have something that you have to compensate for, right? And so use that to double down on being more disciplined in your choices, right?
Right,
Hmm.
right. Or just more consistent in bringing balancing factors to that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. I'm still working on my camera.
It's like you're
Sorry.
trying to train an animal and you're just like, down, boy, down. It's not working.
It's not.
So while you're trying to figure that out, why don't I bring up some of this research that you shared with me earlier, and let's
Yes.
walk through this a little bit, because let's talk about this virus piece. And this is what
Mhm.
inspired me after you talking about to want to take antiviral herbs and nutrition all day long today, right?
Right, seriously.
So let's translate what this says here. The concomitant expression of human endogenous retroviruses and embryonic genes in cancer cells under microenvironmental changes is a potential target for antiretroviral drugs. That is a mouthful. But
Hmm.
Dr. B,
Hmm.
why are we sharing this specific research article with everybody?
Well, again, because it turns out retroviruses cause the MTHFR defect. Retroviruses downregulate methylation. Again, this is relevant because methylation activates the tumor suppressor gene. We've talked about that in several other podcasts, but we want to suppress tumor cells, duh,
Yeah.
right? And so the vicious cycle is, again, makes it a stealth pathogen because it downregulates methylation so that it as a virus can flourish and proliferate, which then further downregulates methylation. And round we go. Soon, pretty soon we've got cancers and, mental and emotional issues and all the other garbage that would go along with it. So, we need to intervene by facilitating methylation. We need to intervene by potentially killing the virus and looking at things like, excuse me, like myrrh and artemisinin for the parasite, that sort of stuff.
So you mean to tell me that a virus could have something to do with potentially creating cancer in the body? Is that what you're trying to say, Doctor?
So we're talking, excuse me, methylation. So the other thing that, well, two critical issues that inhibit methylation is toxic metals and cortisol. We're a bunch of stress junkies in a toxic world. These are
Mhm.
all down-regulating, stressing that methylation pathway. And that's why, I mean, unfortunately, my practice is full of cancer right now. I mean,
Yeah,
there's lots. I mean, I've got a couple young, athletic, non-smoking males with lung cancer, gnarly lung cancer right now. That
yeah.
it's like, why? Why is this stuff taking place? And so it's that concomitant, that combination of the retroviruses. Again, COVID was a massive retrovirus that opened the door for all this. And then we've got the toxic metals of, the graphene oxide that's unfortunately in the air now, and in
Mhm.
the vaxes that some people got. We've got aluminum that's in the air, that's in a lot of the vaxes that we had. Aluminum down regulates the thymus. Thymus is our tagging mechanism to identify, to tag those viruses so the immune system can go to work on them. So we're down regulating all these things and just opening the door, Pandora's box for just chronic illness, which it's great for business. It's not so
Yeah,
good for humanity.
right. So let me
Mhm.
share this last other piece of research that you shared with me earlier, and then let's talk about what can we do? What are some strategies that we can help the listener employ to make them a little more fortified against the potential viral impact on their body? And can you actually kill a virus? Is going to be the other question we're going to go into.
Ooh.
Is that possible? But here you also shared the paternal MTHFR deficiency leads to hypomethylation of young retrotransposons. That's right, transposons.
Gonads.
Yeah, there
It's
you go.
called
Thank you.
gonads.
And that's the motivating factor, right? And reproductive decline across two successive generations. So translate that for everybody. That's wild to think about this.
Right, right. Kind of goes back. It's almost like sounds like the Pottinger's cats, doesn't
Yes, it
it?
does.
Right.
Yeah.
So as we get in the more and more toxic world, and more compromised immune functioning, immune signaling, each successive generation gets less fertile and gets more compromised. Okay, it sucks, but what are we going to do about it? I'm
Mhm.
changing that. I ate healthy and my wife ate healthy. We have, thank God, created healthy kids that are,
Yeah.
trying to break the cycle and reverse the cycle ultimately. Um, but yeah, so MTHFR, if you're struggling for fertility, it's going to compromise gonadal function is ultimately what this is saying. It's
Mhm.
affecting both RNA and DNA. RNA is going to be in methylation is going to be a more localized type of a cancer. When DNA compromised, that's a P450 pathway. That's going to be more of a malignant type of a cancer where it's showing up all over the place instead of just one type of cell that's mutating. This is big name, conditions and things that we're dealing with. So again, clinicians, this is all about empowering you that the world desperately needs our help.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know, Patients, you need to be more diligent than ever I mean, health is an uphill battle, unfortunately, in this world. And we're exposed to toxic metals, we're exposed to stress that downregulate these pathways that it shouldn't be stressed like that.
Mm. No. And I think what we're laying out here with these two research studies, one after the other, is this last one's motivating to say, oh my gosh, you need to methylate. You need to overcome this MTHFR. And the current most accepted answer is taking a methylated B. But that
Mhm,
does
mhm,
not solve for this at all.
mhm,
And it
mhm,
definitely doesn't
mhm,
solve for if it's a virus that's creating that situation in the first place. So
mhm,
where do we
mhm.
begin? I mean, we're kind of, this is overwhelming,
Right.
right? But where do you start?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, banging the same old symbol of, eat your methylated vegetables, eat your organic vegetables, so you're getting the whole food source. Again, it needs to be organic because toxic metals stress these pathways. So they're putting pesticides and taking and having reduced amounts of minerals in traditional non-organic vegetables, not going to be as helpful. There's
Right.
thousands of times the amount of minerals in there. Minerals are alkalizing. They're going to facilitate all these other immune pathways. They're going to limit the area for the toxic metals to bind. So, I mean, it starts with whole foods, you know, don't put the garbage in,
Right,
but
right.
put the rocket fuel, the food as God made it, as God intended, into your
Mhm,
system so that you
mhm.
can flourish and stay young.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and let's talk about other things that we can do very specifically
For
to
sure.
try to strengthen our terrain so that we're not susceptible to a virus. And this is another point that I love to make, and I had many conversations with doctors this weekend about it, is people will think, okay, I've got a virus or I've got a fungus or I've got a parasite, and they bring in these herbs to kill it, or they bring in some agents to totally decimate it. And that's one
Hmm.
thing. But if they never strengthen the terrain in the first place,
Right. Right.
then the vulnerability is still there for whatever exposure to come back. So
Hmm.
this is what I want to remind everybody. If you're going to do this, if you're going to take something from what we said and say, I'm going to start doing things to kill off viruses in my body, let's talk about strengthening the terrain of that first.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think that's
Hmm.
something that you find is one of the first steps that you take when you're trying to help somebody through this process. And
Right.
notice
Right.
many times, right, if you're discovering that somebody has maybe an infection in the pancreas or something, you actually might reach for pancreatrophin PMG first to help
Yeah.
strengthen the terrain. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great point. And so again, a lot of what the signaling that these viruses and these bugs do is it downregulates a pathway in the body that should kill it, right? So B12 is a great example. One of the what to do is a good source of B12. Incidentally, wouldn't you know, terrain wise, lactobacillus organisms in the gut is how
Mm,
the body endogenously within itself makes B12.
right.
Then B12 drives the methylation pathway. B12 is the primary methyl donor for that methylation pathway. So, regulating, balancing that is brilliant for again, upregulating methylation so that we can kill the bugs that then compromise and so on.
Right.
It's a round and round we go.
Sure,
You
sure.
know?
But there are steps we can do in building the terrain and make sure that's strong. And I'm reminded as we're talking about this because so I do, we want to do everything for our body, but you can't do it all at once. And
Yeah.
so I dedicate every third month to bringing my focus back to myself on making sure my terrain is strong from an immune perspective, right?
Mhm.
Because if
Mhm.
cancer is a big issue, and it will be, and there is an immune component to it, I want to make sure that I'm making sure that I'm fortified with my immune system,
Mhm.
making sure I'm
Mhm.
having
Mhm.
all those things, the vitamin C's, the calcium, everything that your body needs for a robust immune response. And I'm
Right.
reminded of this because Joseph Antel, we talk about him a lot. He had
Hmm.
a very rare and form of cancer that he was told, there wasn't much that could be done. And
Wow.
he has a protocol he put himself on that he shares with people. The top of that is all just immune support, right? That is the
Hmm.
beginning
Hmm.
of his journey through cancer, was making sure that he was fortifying his immune system
Hmm.
against that.
Hmm.
And the reason I'm bringing all this in is because if we're going to talk about trying to get rid of viruses, we don't want to just go in and tell you, okay, here are some herbs that will kill viruses. We want to make sure
Right.
you're bringing in what your body needs to have a robust response to any immune challenge and strengthen your terrain first, I think.
Right, right. Well, and the beauty of a lot of those herbs you're discussing is they upregulate the immune pathways to kill it, right? And so
Right, right.
ultimately, that's what you're saying, strengthening the terrain. We want to upregulate the pathways so that the body can kill it. We're not, we're not doing like an antibiotic, antiviral
Right, right.
medication quote kill the virus. We're looking at what pathways need to be facilitated or what weakness in the body allowed that virus or that bacteria, that pathogen to flourish, right? And so that's like you were talking about pancreatrophin. If the virus is proliferating because the pancreas was compromised, we strengthen the pancreas and the body wins the battle ultimately. Best war ever, you know?
Yes. And it is winnable, right? It's possible for that.
Mhm.
And you bring up another point, and I know we're really just kind of stacking here and this is more for the experienced practitioners listening. I always caution about that too, is somebody says, oh, this herb is fantastic and it does all these great things and we should just use that herb. But if you don't have the chemistry, if you don't have the nutrients to
Mhm.
respond to what that herb is trying to engage in your body, you may
Mhm.
get a really abysmal result with that herb and then lose faith
Mhm.
in its value, right? Because you
Mhm.
didn't have
Mhm.
what it took to respond to it. So
Mhm.
that's a really important point to remember. So we have to have
Right.
chemistry before we bring in something to stimulate what it's trying to do.
Right. So practitioners, patients, remember it's not the herb that was the problem. It was the way it wasn't the right herb for you, or it was
Right.
the way the body handled it. So learn what is that trying to tell you? What is your body trying to tell you at that point?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're
Mhm.
getting ourselves fortified. We're strengthening our terrain. What are some of the things we can bring in to help us to get these viruses in a place that they are not impacting our health in this huge.
Right. Well, fortunately, and bringing it back, the conversation is the same. Upregulating methylation,
Yeah, yeah.
balancing the pathways that fight them. So it's your good forms of B12, right? B6, folate, especially. These are all the methyl donors. These help drive that pathway to allow us to, and incidentally, that's what I was also going to talk about. B12 upregulates the innate immune system, and that was the first response to somebody sneezes in our face. The innate immune system goes after it before it starts creating antibodies. So B12
Mhm.
upregulates all of that. So we get methylation, and we get a stronger innate immune system, and good energy and better flexibility. And B12 deficiency causes a tension of the fascia around the muscle. So these are all signs that maybe, hey, you need B12. Easy fix, right? Again, not, what is the, I was trying to think of the inactive form of B12 that everybody takes, cobalamin, meth, we need
Oh,
at
right,
least,
right.
cobalamin, is not typically going to be your answer, especially if you're under methylator. So anyway, so food is our answer. Upregulate the pathways in the body, allow the immune system, the glands and organs to function properly. Uh, I think that's kind of what you were referring to earlier when, I talked about a big shift in my clinical protocol when, early on I was treating bacteria, I was treating viruses and so on. Then as I started learning to prioritize or see what the body was telling us, I found that strengthening the weak gland or the weak organ would get rid of the bacteria, and
Right.
effectiveness just really went through the roof when I did that.
That's amazing. And that's what shows people that there's so much more you can do. And I hope,
Seriously.
I hope you've been listening and paying attention. Some of the things that you're taking away from this so far are number one, genes are not a diagnosis. That's what we got to remind people. The
Mhm.
single nucleotide polymorphisms or SNPs are not destiny, right?
Mhm.
And expression is way more important than presence of a gene, right? Would you agree with all that?
Right. Epigenetics. At this point in current understanding societally, epigenetics is what we have to offer. So use
Yeah.
this to double down to make your better choices. Um, Stay tuned. The conversation will continue. I'm still clamoring for the opportunity to prove that we downregulate that retrovirus, and that gene glitch can go away. Yeah, God of infinite possibilities. I think any of this should be a reality. But it goes against what most of society's trying to do to us, if you will.
Yeah, that's true. Well, well, I'm not sure it's a direct. They're trying to do it to it, but it's happening, right? Based on
It
just
is, yeah,
ignorance
yeah.
of a lot of the things that are happening
Hmm.
out there, for
Yeah, our
sure.
toxic environment is very stressful on all these liver pathways that we're talking about. And
Yeah,
so, yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
But again, there are more and more opportunities for us to be able to respond and get ahead of these things if we
Hmm.
if we do start making some more consistent, healthy choices in support of
Right.
the body's ability to do all those things.
Right. So quickly, let's talk, if we're inhaling those toxic metals, like I'm a very active cyclist, so I need to take lung supplements. I'll get a little cough like you just did when I'm riding my bike around all the thallium in car exhaust. So
Yeah,
I take regular lung supplements to help my body handle that added stressor. And so this is the empowerment part, right?
yeah,
So if you're working in a refinery or you're working, at place where there's a lot of perfumes and chemicals, you want to be looking at the nutrients, Livoplex and Livco especially, to help drive the milk thistle, these herbs and things to facilitate liver detoxification. So understand your risks, understand your environment so that you can be empowered and have the gold in your hand and the steering wheel in your hand to make the better choices, and not just be duped by your so-called destiny.
exactly. Well said, sir. Well said. Well, I think we wrapped that up pretty well for everybody. Hope that we covered a lot of bases, and for those of you that may have some pushback on some of that, please do. We're open to this. We're
And learn from it
curious
too.
and compassionate when others criticize us, right? We want criticism because we want this to be a value to everybody, and we want to make sure that where we're communicating things in a way that are helping people and not putting them in a place that is cavalier or irresponsible, right? We want to make sure that people know that we're identifying new and more things that you can do versus allowing somebody else to tell you that there's nothing you can do about it. And that's really where we're going with this. And so this episode is airing after Dr. Verzal has been in Dallas. So unfortunately, if you missed him, we're going to have to figure out a way to bring him back and doing some muscle testing. But for those of you who want to learn a little more on Dr. Verzal's techniques, he's actually got a course coming up, the Headache Advantage course, the 7 pain patterns as tools for total body transformation through the Gata Institute. And it's going to be 8 Tuesdays in an 8-week course. So we've got May 5th, 12th, 19th, 26th, June, all the way through. Wow, you're a busy boy. What's going on there?
That was supposed to be, my whole race schedule just got trumped.
Yikes. You know what? If it is for a good cause, because you want to help educate and provide answers for everybody. And if you haven't bought the book yet, The Headache Advantage, it is, I think, something that everybody should have access to. The more and more people learn about it, the more I feel good about the fact that I'm sharing that with as many people as possible. So,
and the fun part about that series that you just talked about is it's going to be designed to be patient facing. So there's going to be, as you've heard us talk, lots of doctor clinical pearls and that sort of stuff. But this is designed to be patient facing, something that somebody that has headaches can purchase and log into from here on out to solve those problems.
Excellent. So we'll put a link below for you to be able to check that out. And please keep the questions coming, keep the suggestions coming, and keep the challenges coming. We want to make sure that we are in this conversation and we're learning more. And hopefully one of these days we'll be able to present about some data we know about getting these viruses under control and having a more positive outcome with their genetics. How cool would that be?
Yeah, maybe I'll even figure out how to work my camera in the meantime.
Baby steps.
This up close and personal is a little bit much for me.
Hopefully you were listening and not watching too much on this.
Right, huh? Yeah, so be empowered. Ultimately, the gist here, I think we probably just scratched the surface of this subject.
Yeah.
Hopefully, like as you said, it's going to stimulate get the wheels turning for people and maybe rub some feathers wrong. And so bring it. Let's carry the conversation on. Let's keep growing and learning together so that we can all make the most of this thing called life.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for being a part of this. You keep us inspired to keep doing this every week and sharing what we talk about with everybody else. Keep your comments coming. Please share these with the people that you think it will help change their lives. That's what we're here for. We want to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to light a candle and keep that light going to as many people as possible. So thanks again. And any last words there, Dr. B?
Be empowered.
Be empowered. There it is. See you next time. Thanks for listening.